The immigration debate is usually sold as a choice between border security and open borders, as though the country has only two settings: locked down or left unattended altogether. Undoubtedly, governments need some control of their borders, but control is not the same thing as good policy, and a frightening headline is not the same thing as a national trend. Alex Nowrasteh argues that when we compare immigrants with the native born Americans on crime, work, assimilation, most of the conventional scare tactics fall apart. The harder question is whether data can settle the debate that is also about sovereignty, identity, and trust. Here to help me work through all these issues is Alex Nowrasteh of the Cato Institute. Alex, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I always love talking to folks who are and I'll put this derisively to some folks, but I think to people who are actually in the data scientists, data nerds, data monkeys. I always, as a fellow data person myself, I always love talking to people. Uh, eh, Let me just ask you a general question. Do you find it offensive if someone were to refer to you as a data nerd or a data monkey? Do you find that offensive, or do you wear that as a badge of honor?
I'm indifferent. I mean, it's just a descriptor. Uh, maybe statistician, econometrics expert, econometrician might be better. But my training is as an economist, and so my work and my expertise is related to that. So, like, and you can tell my age because the statistical program I use is Stata, which is no longer used by the youngins.
So, back in my day, you always had the debate between the folks who used R or Python in their work, and I guess you come after me. You're much younger than I am, so you've probably have you ever had to get your hands dirty with R or Python?
Well, I think it's actually reversed. I think R and Python is the stuff used by the new hip people, the people
Oh,
who know what they're doing now. So I mean, I have, I had a little bit, but the thing is with Claude and AI programs, it's very easy for me to do some coding in Stata and then translate it into R or Python. So I basically skipped the stage. I waited long enough, delayed long enough learning those pretty simple languages as I understand it, to now I don't have to at all.
right. Yeah. Excuse me. AI is tools in general have if you don't rely on them to be anything more than a tool. I do find that they've been helpful to someone who acknowledges them as a tool as opposed to write my article for me or conduct my interview for me. I think that we're not quite there yet, but that's a topic for a different show, AI and how to use it properly. Uh, right now, okay, so you're an economist by training, I would say, right? Um, you grew up in Southern California. Uh, when it comes to immigration, that's one of the hot spots of where you get debates over policy and conflicts. But at the same time, it is a bit of a melting pot. I'm a New Yorker. I find debates over immigration somewhat silly, quite honestly. And a lot of times I chalk that up to I'm exposed to everything. When you live in, say, Queens, New York, the most concentrated area of diverse ethnicities, religions, cultural backgrounds. Talk to me a little bit how you migrated from economic study to what you're known for now, which is sort of like one of the experts on immigration policy. And what did your upbringing, perhaps in Southern California, have to do with that?
So I chose immigration because it's a topic that covers every aspect of economics and social science. So you can start by writing about how immigrants affect wages. When you're bored talking about labor economics and wages, you can talk about the fiscal effect. When you're bored with that, you can write about crime, cultural assimilation, political assimilation, terrorism. And then by the time you're bored with terrorism, wages are interesting again. So it's like a great way to talk about basically every corner of social science. Secondly, it's a great way to talk about the United States historically and as a whole today, because basically every American is the descendant of somebody who chose to come over to these shores in one way or another. And so it's really the story of the United States. There's a few other countries in the world that are like that, but not that many. So it's a very unique place. And I think it's a place that is not a nation state in the sense that nation means a common ancestry. We're all from the same ethnic group. And it's because of immigration that we're not that way, right? So if you notice, I'm rejecting the 1619 Project's view of the United States as being a racial and ethnic project. I think it's not that, and we've gotten better at this over time, and that's due to largely immigration over our history, making it impossible to have an ethnic conception of what it means to be an American. We are Americans. We are Americans because we have this creed that we share, a belief in the Declaration of Independence, Constitution, some broad values, I think the only actual cultural marker that really matters is the ability to speak English. I think basically nothing else matters in terms of this. And I'm talking about culturally, not legally or anything like that,
Right.
but culturally, it'd be pretty hard to think of somebody as an American if they don't speak English. Um,
And that is an interesting point. I never really thought of it that way because famously, well, I don't know if famously is the right word nowadays, but we don't have an official language. An official language was never built into the Constitution. There was, of course, great debate about it initially. I think it broke down, some people wanted to, the elitists wanted to use Greek as the official language because they felt only the educated might be able to speak Greek or the landowners. But the debate over it was enough where we never really established an official language, right?
we didn't. There was actually also debates early on to say that, say, German and other cultural groups should get their own representatives and that there should be some recognition of the German language. And they basically had said, nah, we're not going to do that. And then what de facto happened is ethnic groups started to sort of vote, not as blocks, but like overwhelmingly for certain political parties. So that sort of became the de facto ethnic representation. Rather than having it set down in law, it would be by political party, and then due to the process of assimilation, integration, these things would fade over time. New ethnic group would come in, they would vote politically, and then it would change. And this is, Republicans and Democrats have had this different ethnic groups dueling over time. The story of Black Americans being Republican and then overwhelmingly Democratic. The story of Irish, for instance, in New York, overwhelmingly Democratic, but in Philadelphia, overwhelmingly Republican, and that's because of just local politics and things like that. But you asked earlier, like, my upbringing, maybe how my past helped with immigration. I don't have like a personal immigration story that's interesting. My grandparents on my father's side came over in the 1940s. They didn't have some arduous tale, so it's like a pretty boring like American story, right? And they did well. Um, I don't speak any foreign languages or anything like that, like most Americans. The sociologists will say that America is a graveyard of languages, which is true. There used to be like a million people here who spoke Hungarian. Like nobody speaks Hungarian anymore or German. And so, growing up in Southern California, though, it is quite an immigrant melting pot. A lot of Mexicans, obviously, other Hispanic immigrants, East and South Asians, Middle Easterners, Europeans, Africans, tons of people. And it's not perfect, but it works pretty darn well. And I remember in 1994, when I was a kid, it was around the time when I was just starting to become aware of politics. There was this huge debate over something called Prop 187. California has this crazy system of voting on laws and state constitutional amendments. And Proposition 187 said two things. Like, one, we're going to end welfare and government benefits for illegal immigrants. And two, we're going to force every state employee, including teachers and police officers, if they think somebody is an illegal immigrant, they have to report it to the deportation authorities. Everybody always forgets that second part. The first part got all the attention. So this passed in 1994. It broke basically state politics forever after that. And then the courts overturned it not that long later. So the Republican Party went hard supporting this bill. The gubernatorial candidate at that time, Pete Wilson, who was a Republican running for re-election, went hard for it. And prior to this election, the Hispanic vote was basically split in California. It was like 47-53 Republican Democrat on the gubernatorial level, or 50-50 even. After that, it basically became like 25-75 Republican Democratic. And as you know, in a place like California, where the demographics were shifting because of immigration and differential birth rates, that was devastating for the Republican Party. And they basically consigned themselves to long term minority status in that state. So I saw a political party commit suicide in real time by being anti immigrant. And by the way, illegal immigrants didn't have access to welfare benefits anyway. So it was like totally worthless, um, like suicide, that it had nothing to do, there was nothing good that could possibly have come from this. And so, unless you were a nativist and you just didn't want these people here. And so that was sort of a formative political moment for me in studying this issue.
Yeah, that is fascinating what happened in California. And I do remember being on the opposite side of the country, Prop 187. Like when you mentioned it, it triggered in my head. Um, Before we get into data and stuff, which I find fascinating on your part, and what it proves, disproves, or what it can do neither of, we'll get to that in a second. But let me ask you, just psychologically, in terms of the nation's psychology. Um, it's very interesting to me that the tensions around immigration are nothing new. There's always been, while at the same time that this country has always been a land for immigrants, it's always been a destination for immigrants. Um, there's always been strong pockets of nativism. I mean, going back, say, to the no things, or even before that. And also, so talk to me about that sort of persistent streak of nativism that's existed. It's nothing new. It's not recent. To the extent to which it's always there in our national fabric, and uh, on a very simple level, say, why do you think that persists? When very obviously, as you said, everyone is from somewhere else that is a citizen of this country.
Well, I mean, you can't have nativism without having an immigrant rich society.
Of
In the same way that you can't really have racism if there's no other races around, right? Or religious bigotry if there's no other religions, right? So it's just a byproduct of having an immigrant rich society is you're just going to have people in this diverse, pluralistic place that we have that just don't like it and don't like them. So that's always going to be there. There's always this, and there's this, there's the old joke that says, my ancestors didn't come to this country to see it overrun by foreigners. And so there's this other thing of just like, trying to close the door behind you. And the way that you rationalize this is say, listen, the ancestors that came, the immigrants that came when my ancestors came, they were good. They worked hard, they assimilated, they didn't have access to all this welfare. But the immigrants now, they're different. The welfare system is different. This or that is different. So they're bad now. And this is basically like a 60 to 90 year cycle. And I have no doubt that in the next few decades, where the nativist movement is going to be widely populated by people, by Americans with Hispanic last names, who are the kids or grandkids of Hispanic immigrants, who are going to be making exact same arguments against whatever the new group of immigrants is that were made against their ancestors. That's just the way it is, and it's probably actually a sign of assimilation to American norms. This happened with every group in the past, so like I don't get too hung up about it. I think it's just like part and parcel. But one of the things I do notice is the people who seem to dislike immigration the most are those that have the least contact with immigrants. So it's not places like Los Angeles or Houston, Texas, or Miami or New York that are the hotbeds of nativism. If immigrants had this terrible effect on society that nativists think that they do, then that is where the nativism would be. But it's not. It's in places like West Virginia, where the immigrant population is about 4%. of the population. It's in places like the Dakotas where there's almost no immigrants at all. It's places where no immigrants live, where people dislike it the most. Now, I think there's some reasons for that that aren't totally insane, but just on the base level, that should be good evidence for you that all of the purported harms that immigrants bring with them are either not true or greatly exaggerated.
Do you attribute that to, well, let me take a half step back. What do you attribute that to? Is it merely fear of the unknown? Is it a political climate that capitalizes on that fear of the unknown for its own gain? Um, or is it something else?
I think it's partly fear of the unknown is probably the base of it. I think the other part is if you live in New York City and you want to deport everybody who's an immigrant, that will be devastating to the city. You'll probably deport half your neighbors and half your friends, and it will destroy the economy and the society there. But if you live in a place with no immigrants, it's very easy to say deport them all because it's not going to affect your life, right? So it's like a costless thing to support. I think part of it is also chaos, perceptions of chaos. So if you live in New York City, um, it probably doesn't seem that it's chaotic in a way. Like I've never lived there, but I visited. It seems a little chaotic at times.
Sure.
But there's an underlying order to it, and it's just frenetic and energetic is the way that I would describe it. Um, but if you don't live there and you watch like videos of it, you see these immigrants doing stuff or whatever, it seems like it's totally out of control. It's total chaos. Or if you look at the border, for instance, back during the Biden administration when so many people are crossing, it's totally chaotic and insane. So I can understand somebody who's not there who looks at a real chaotic situation at the border and says, "This is out of control. We got to lock it down." I understand that reaction. Um, and I think the reaction of seeing a place like New York, a city where everybody looks different, they're from all over the world, and thinking, oh my God, that's chaotic. We got to lock that down. I kind of understand where they're coming from. I think that's like a normal reaction, but it's also just wrong. And I think the duty is for people who have that reaction to think about it for more than 3 seconds and to act when they do act or form an opinion or vote on it, to spend just like 2 minutes reflecting on that. Because I could say, okay, yeah, people crossing the border illegally, chaotic, out of control. People walking down the street speaking a different language in another city with a low crime rate, maybe that's not so bad.
Um, I do sort of draw similarities to, I think it's Daryl Davis, someone who is a black man whose whole life has been spent reaching out to Klansmen in this
Right.
country, right? Because, and then you find out that he's able to disavow those out and proud racists, bigots, simply because they get to know him. They've never really spent time around someone, you know, and it's based on that fear of the unknown or hatred of the unknown that you just described that may exist around immigrants. You see it in a lot of religious bigotry as well, like especially in America where we don't have a history of civil war based on ethnicity or religion. I mean, we've had our civil war, obviously, but I mean, compared to other countries, other nations, and you do make that distinction between nation and country. Um, h- how much do you feel that? Oh, let me part B. Do you feel that religion plays a major role in either supporting that sort of anti-immigrant streak that you see in cycles, or do you feel it helps mitigate it?
And that's a hard question because I think historically a lot of the nativist movement in the United States was radically anti Catholic against the Irish, Italians, Eastern Europeans. And then you saw a lot of anti Semitism from the 1890s to, well, basically right after World War II. And those twin portions of religious bigotry were important components of closing the border in the 1920s. They weren't the whole thing, but they were important components of it. And so, yeah, religion definitely plays a role. But on the other hand, religion has also been pretty good at helping immigrants integrate and assimilate culturally. There's a lot of sociological work I read on this, and one of the fascinating stories is about these Cuban refugees. There's a new family that arrived in the 1990s in Miami, Florida, and they came to Catholic Church for mass, and they arrived like 5 minutes late, and the priest stopped the mass and he addressed the people who were late and said, "Listen, in Cuba or in other countries, you can arrive late. That is unacceptable. Here, you have to get here on time and be quiet and sit down." And that is a way of. Oh, and then they were on time from then on, according to the interviews of priests. And that is like it's a small piece of integration and assimilation, but that is a distinction between the United States and a lot of other countries, right? You talk to people who are it's as different countries as like Italy, Israel, India, Mexico. They always have some joke about like, oh, I'm on like India Standard Time, which means like hours late for everything, right? Like every country has a joke like that, right? And they assume it's unique to them, but they're not. But that goes away usually pretty rapidly in the U.S. Because our time is actually very valuable as opposed to a place like India is a poor country. Compared to India, our time here is very valuable. It's not as valuable there, so it doesn't matter if you're late because it's not like people have better things to do anyway. And so that is like a very small piece of integration assimilation that religion helps, but it also is sometimes an argument that for bigotry and closing the borders.
Yeah, I kind of I do kind of see it the way you just described because initially I very much see the using religion as a wedge against immigration. Like you said, the anti-Catholic bias when, say, when the largest immigrant group in the USA were the Germans, the Protestants, they were anti-Catholic. Then when the Catholics had gotten past that initial anti-Catholic barrier, then of course they joined in and saying, "Hey, we don't want the Jews here." You had the streak of anti-Semitism, and now we see it, of course, with the anti-Muslim uh, setup to objections to mass immigration here.
And the anti-Hindu sentiment. Have you noticed that with like the Indians?
Very interesting. That's a great point you bring it up. And again, maybe it's where I live, but I I see it less as a religious objection as much as a uh, related to the H-1B, right? Where the perception is that there's this specific ethnic group that's taking away, quote, all the good jobs, or that for some reason they get a carve out when nativists like Elon Musk happen to, or interestingly, Vivek Ramaswamy, when he was still in the public eye, right? It was interesting that as soon as he said, "Well, I'm America first," except for when Indians come here on H-1Bs, he kind of disappeared from that national MAGA spotlight, right? He kind of real, that he was put aside a little bit. Same thing with Musk, right? So I view it less as anti-Hindu as anti-Indian related to employment more so.
And the thing is, like, I think it's hard to separate these things, right? Because a lot of the anti-Irish bigotry was obviously like anti-Catholic, but a lot of it was also ethnic based
Sure.
stuff. And same with Italians, Polish Jews, etc. Right? So it's like really hard to separate these things. But like you see these, videos of people, and maybe they're not representative, but like protesting Hindu temples being built in Texas along religious lines. So I don't know. Like you might be right, but it's really hard to separate them. And I find that once you kick open that door of bigotry, um, basically you throw every type of uh, phobia or bigotry at the wall, right? So, like, let's say you dislike Indians because they take all the good jobs and they're too skilled, or whatever that means. And it's like, okay, it's really easy to throw in the anti-Hindu bigotry. It's really easy to make comments about, I don't know, the food or whatever. Anyway, I find it absurd. Like, the anti-Indian stuff bothers me more than anything else. I have so many friends and neighbors who are Indian. Fantastic neighbors, by the way. Um, they cook for us all the time. It's awesome. Our kids all play together. Nice people, low crime rates. They're wonderful neighbors, and they're high skilled. So
Yes.
it's like, what do you want? Like, what more do you want from people?
at some point, you're kinda left with the conclusion that it's just simply bigotry. If you can so, I always have my little sort of conflict story that I have, which is, my son is autistic, and initially, when we were trying to find the right therapy for him and whatnot, um, the doctor who ended up doing a lot for us to improve our situation, was Turkish. Now, for someone born a Greek American who's born here, you know, uh,
Yeah,
doesn't mean a thing to me, right?
yeah,
To my mother, this was, "Well, how can you have a Turk?" Because it was that bigotry from the old countries, not from the US, by the way.
yeah,
And for the listeners who may not be aware, it might be English, Irish, Chinese, Japanese, take your pick. There's always these skirmishes ethnically, right? Um, but once she met the Turkish doctor who was taking care of her grandson, a lot of that bigotry washed away. Right? Because and also I could point out that where she's from in Greece, my mother, is the furthest geological location from Turkey that you could get. Meaning that her parents and grandparents and had nothing to do with the Turks more than likely, right? This was just a cultural thing that was imbued in her. Um, I think that if people have that opportunity and they still hold on to their bigotry, in my mind, they may just be lost causes, and that's where you just have to rely on the American legal system to say, like, "No, you can't commit acts of aggression or coercion just because you personally don't like someone." But how would you resolve that? Because you're a libertarian, correct?
mhm.
As am I. So, give me your worldview of because I think, um you'll always get I get this a lot too, right? Like, if you identify as a libertarian, especially in today's environment, what's the first thing you hear? Like, "Oh, you're up for open borders, no control at all, you don't care if we get overrun, by X group," fill in the blank,
Yeah.
"You don't care about the American way of life," etcetera, etcetera. Talk to me about those first principles, like, if you consider yourself a libertarian, um, or in, Alex's worldview, why are you pro-immigration? And really, like, whether you call yourself open borders or whatever.
So, I mean, I'm not pro immigration, I'm just pro freedom, pro liberty. And I think an important part of that is that if the government's going to do something, if it's going to use force against anybody, I think it should have a good reason for doing so. And immigration is a mutually beneficial to voluntary exchange. Somebody coming here from another country, getting a job, working, renting, buying things. If you want to stop that, you got to have a good reason. And the reason should probably be individual and particular to the person, right? So, okay, the guy maybe has a criminal conviction. Maybe that's a very high probability of committing another crime while here, violating the life, liberty, and private property of somebody else. Okay, that's a reason to stop him. I think that's a pretty good reason. Let's say there's a guy come in who spent, he disappeared for a couple of years in a prison camp, in a camp, in the mountains of Afghanistan. Okay, that's probably a pretty good reason to check him out or not let him in. Um, so that's where I draw the line is you got to have a good reason. And good reasons include protecting the life, liberty, and private property of the people who are here, and not, I think, and that's about it. Like disease, keeping out disease, keeping people out who are sick, who could spread contagious illness. That's another good reason to do it. So that's where I start. It's the same reason why I would say, hey, John, maybe we shouldn't let you, go live in a place. It's about the same as that. So that's my standard for that, for blocking people.
What about and please forgive me because I'm in the unsavory position of having to play devil's advocate to an argument I largely agree with. So, I'll state that up front. But what about folks who say, "Look, um, those are rights reserved for Americans. Those are rights when you're an American citizen, and don't American citizens have a say in who gets in and out of this country? Shouldn't they have a say rather in who gets in and out of this country?"
Well, I think Americans do have a say. We have that say every time we choose to interact with people. We vote with our dollars a lot more convincingly than we vote in the voter booth, right? So if you don't want to interact with immigrants, I don't think you should be forced to. If you don't want to rent to them, you shouldn't have to. If you don't want to hire them, you should be allowed not to. You don't have to do anything with them, I think, if you don't want to. And if enough people believe that, then there'd be no reason for immigrants to come here because there'd be no benefits for them to do so. And so that is a vote that actually matters to me. It's very easy to say, oh, I don't like immigrants. I want them out of here. It's a lot harder to change your life and to make those decisions so that they don't want to come here in the first place by changing your economic behavior, right? So that's the main way that Americans have a say in these things. Now, if Americans, and this is where I think that we absolutely do have a say to do whatever we want, is um, participation in the political system. So um, the way that we view things like voting and political participation, I think that you should have to live here for a while, a long time before you become a citizen and are allowed to vote. I think that, and we can make that longer if we want to. I have no problem with that if people want to debate those things. I'm a big supporter of birthright citizenship. It's important for a lot of reasons, including integration and assimilation. But if you wanted to pass a law that said somebody had to live in the United States for 25 years before they could become a citizen and vote, I'd be fine with that. Uh, Pressure is a compromise, to allow more people to come in. But the thing that really matters is allowing people to come here to work and live and interact with everybody else voluntarily, because that's where all the benefits are for them and for us. I mean, the thing that we haven't really touched on yet is that, like, why do people come here? They come here for the economics. The wage increase from a developing country on average to the US, it's a fourfold increase in wages, right? That is enormous. That's because the workers, the immigrants, are much more productive here in the US. So we are literally leaving trillions of dollars of bills laying around and lost economic output and potential by locking people in poor countries with crappy institutions. And we should, if we let them come here, we can siphon off maybe just a little bit of that to convince some of our friends and colleagues who are opposed to immigration to maybe just be a little bit more supportive of it.
Yeah, I've always found it fascinating that, generally speaking, uh, nativists who complain about too much immigration will also complain about low birth rates within their country. I mean, Elon Musk is famous for this, right? Hey, who's gonna feed in because you need bodies, even in the age of high technology and automation. You still need bodies to make an economy hum. And uh, you're a data guy, perfect person. Can you quantify for me the effect that immigrants historically have had in the? I've always maintained that one of our secret weapons to becoming by far the largest, most productive economy the the world has ever seen, and even today with all the political nonsense about, oh, we got to look out for China, or whatever. The U.S.'s GDP is four times. I think if you took the next four nations' output, they would match the US's, right? We are by far the largest, most productive economy in the world, and the secret weapon has been largely unfettered or largely favorable immigration, right? Uh, Talk to me about that a little bit because I think there's a lot of misconceptions around that immigration hurts us economically, uh, as opposed to helping us economically.
No, humans are the ultimate resource, as the economist Julian Simon said. Humans are not just mindless consumers. We make things, we start new businesses, we invent things, we make things more efficient. We buy and we sell. So the more people there are here, the more brains there are in the United States, the more, and because we have a relatively free market system. I wish there were more free market, but it's relatively pretty good. People can start businesses and they get to keep most of the profits and benefits of doing that. So we get, it's what economists call like a selection effect, right? So we don't get the people who around the world who just want to sit around and use welfare all the time. We generally get the people from countries that these people that they're sort of pretty cosmopolitan. They don't really care about sticking around their own culture. They're usually pretty hardworking, and they're usually very entrepreneurial on average. So, like the typical immigrant in the U.S. is twice as likely to start a business as a native-born American. And native-born Americans are known around the world for being fairly entrepreneurial, right? So that's like a remarkable statistics. We're getting like the cream of the cream of the crop from all around the world for that reason because of self-selection. It's not because the immigration system is so smart. It's not. It's a freaking mess. It's a disturbing mess. But what it is we have relatively low taxes here. The legal and economic system is relatively free market. So you can start a business, you keep most of the benefits, and it's fairly easy to start a business. We also make it so that when you come here as an immigrant, you don't have recourse to welfare benefits. Very, very little, and only for a handful of immigrants do they have access to welfare, right? So you have to work right off the bat. Meanwhile, you go to a place like Europe, you can go there immediately. It's hard to start a business. There are all these labor market regulations that make it tough to get a job. A lot of countries you have to join a union, which is like basically impossible unless you're skilled and speak the language. And they give you a ton of welfare right off the bat. So they just attract, like the people who are attracted to that are different than the people who come to the US. So for instance, people will say, oh, Europe has all these problems because of Muslim immigration, it's a cultural issue. And like, maybe that's true to some extent, but you take a look at immigrants to Europe from like Iran and you compare Iranian immigrants to the US. Iranian immigrants in the US are like the fourth most productive ethnic group per capita by income. And in Sweden and Norway, they're basically the same as Somalis, who are like the least productive ethnic group in the United States. That's an immigrant group, right? So it's like radical differences, right? And some of that is selection effects. The most productive immigrants came to the US from Iran. The least productive went to the Nordic countries. But some of it is also like, hey, once you're here, you can really do well for yourself and build yourself up. It's hard to start a business in Norway or Sweden. So that's like a major part of those differences. We get some of the best people, and there is just a big benefit to having more and more people, even if they're average, ordinary people. Just having more people here who are working, who are thinking, who are provide that manpower and labor power and brain power. Even if they're average, it all makes a difference. It's all positive.
I agree with you, but let me put myself begrudgingly again in nativist shoes. All right, Alex, you're right. Um, for every 100 immigrants that come here, I grant you, we'll find a couple, a handful perhaps, who are highly productive. They're escaping persecution. So we want those guys. We want the Einsteins that we rounded up after World War II and all the physicists, all the German physicists and chemists, right? But certainly you can't make that claim about the majority of immigrants that come to this country, can you, Alex?
Well, I think I would, right? So, like, not everybody needs, like, you don't need to be a genius or an incredible entrepreneur to make a positive contribution. Most people do make a positive contribution to the economy just by being normal people who don't commit crimes. By working, by taking care of your family. Let's say you're just, 9 to 5, blue collar. You work on a construction site. That person is a valuable contribution to the United States. And the notion that just because an immigrant does those things, that we should say, oh, he's a net negative for the country is absurd. Like nobody would say that about a native born American who works the exact same job. But all of a sudden, because the person comes from the other side of a border, we can say that about them. It's absurd. It's absurd. I mean, just because somebody's from West Virginia and works in construction around the area where I am, they add a lot to the local economy, and they would add as much if they were from across the Rio Grande.
Right. But to that point, then, you hear a lot of these common arguments, and unfortunately, fed into by the current administration, the current political movements, that, hey, these immigrants, yes, they're doing jobs perhaps that, quote, Americans would not do. But they're also taking, the reason you can't afford a house, Alex, if you're a native born American, is because these immigrants, they're jacking up house prices. You can't rent an apartment at a decent rate because, you have all these immigrants coming here and so there's competition for the low rents, there's competition for the houses. Uh, they're driving down wages because Americans would rather hire a cheap illegal immigrant as opposed to an American union worker. How do you address those objections?
Well, I mean, on the house part, there's a lot of reasons why houses are expensive. I think part of it is zoning the land use, but also it's totally true. If you have an area where there's more people moving in, there's going to be more demand. But I find it remarkable. This is like one of the only times where you can say it's bad that the value of the asset owned by Americans going up is bad. That's bad. So that's like kind of silly, in my opinion, right? Like, so I'm like, yes, immigrants increase house prices, and yes, almost all houses are owned by native-born Americans. Okay, great. That's just another transfer of wealth from immigrants to Americans. Okay, great.
It's a net benefit to the nativist cause, so to
It's
speak.
well, it's a net benefit to Americans, regardless of what they agree with. And there are some places in this country where the population would be smaller than it is now were it not for immigrants. And a lot of the people who bought houses there 50 or 60 years ago, they'd be worth a lot less if it weren't for these immigrants coming in and increasing housing prices through demand. So, and that's fine. That's we want prices to adjust based on supply and demand. That's how it's rational. In terms of wages, um there really is almost no effect of immigration on wages. And that might seem kind of weird to people, but that's because immigrants do increase the supply of labor. They also increase the demand for labor because they buy things, they're human beings. And so the net effect of this, and it really can't be different if you take a look at economic theory, is basically the wages don't really change that much on average. Now, there might be some occupations where they do change, right? So, like being a janitor in Los Angeles is a lot lower paying job today than it was 50 years ago. But wages on average, even for high school dropouts, they're not lower because of immigration. Wages for all these different tranches of workers really not lower because of immigration. You will sometimes see people quote the economist George Borjas to say that wages are lower, but his measurement is wages relative to others, right? So he takes a look at the wage of high school dropouts compared to high school graduates. And what you'll see is compared to that, compared to each other, the wages of dropouts are lower relative to high school grads, but they're both up over what they were 10 years ago. It's just that the gap has gone a little bit wider. Who cares about the gap if everybody has higher wages, right? So there is effect. There is an effect. But in terms of like decreasing wages, it's not there. It doesn't. And there's a bunch of like thorny, really complicated economic reasons for this we don't need to get into. We can if you want. I can try. But it's not there.
Yeah, data guys can talk about anything forever, so I appreciate that you probably could answer that. But let me ask you some general questions, right? So a couple of things you said brought up some very intuitive questions for me. Okay, so uh, do you have some sense of the breakdown of immigration in terms of the age of when people come here? By that I mean, someone who is anti-immigration can say, "All right, Alex, you've kind of said they don't, immigrants per capita uh, are a net positive economic asset to the nation as opposed to a drain. But is that broken up in pockets such that there are certain areas of the country that the immigration consists of large families, whereas, yeah, they may not be getting welfare checks, they may not be getting SNAP benefits, but what they are getting the benefit is public schooling, public health care, because it could be mom, dad, and 4 kids, for example, right? As opposed to young single professionals who might be migrating to the country, who are less likely to use things like public schooling, public health care, and from the second they set foot in this country, they're taxpayers. They're a net positive because they came here, they're skilled or whatever. So can you give us a breakdown of how that immigration pie kind of is in terms of consumption and replenishment of public services?
Yeah, so the simple way to think about it is the older you are and less educated you are, the more of a drain you could be. Now, on average, immigrants do pay more in taxes than they consume in benefits. But if you are a 60-year-old immigrant who is a high school dropout, that is usually pretty bad for the public fisc. But if you are a 20-year-old immigrant who is a high school dropout, that's positive for it because you will immediately start being a taxpayer. But we paid $0 for you for public education. So that's a positive one. And then the scenario you said, like you have two parents, four kids, the parents become taxpayers immediately, but they don't pay enough taxes for their four kids' public education. I mean, nobody pays enough taxes for four kids in public education. I have my fourth kid on the way,
Mhm.
and there is no way that I'm going to pay enough taxes, like property taxes, to pay for all that. Right? It's a problem with the public education system, frankly, and if we had a rational system, I would pay 100% of that price, right? Through some kind of school choice scheme or something, right? That would be the rational thing to do. We don't have a rational system. So, yeah, but the way to view it is like those kids, yeah, they cost money now. They are going to grow up. They are going to pay other taxes. They're going to pay income tax. They're going to pay capital gains tax. They're going to pay property tax. They're going to pay sales tax. And the idea that over the course of their lives, the amount of money that they pay in taxes will, mostly pay for at least the, public education that they received. Right? Like their parents' property taxes won't pay for it, but they will over the course of their lives more than make up for that. What they won't make up for, of course, is Social Security and Medicare. Those are just catastrophically broken and on the road to ruin for reasons that have nothing to do with immigration. But what's interesting is immigration actually delays the failure of those programs by several years because immigrants are a little younger than native born Americans. They are more likely to work. They are less likely to receive other welfare benefits, and as a result, have a positive fiscal contribution.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, obviously, they're new suckers to the Ponzi scheme of Social Security, so they're gonna contribute the most and get the least out of it. But when you're looking at data, and I don't know how far back off the top of your head, how far back do we have reliable economic data about immigration, would you say, in this country?
Well, we don't have much reliable economic data prior to like the 1940s, especially on macro level. We have some data you can get for like certain occupations, and it's kind of haphazardly collected and unknown provenance back to the 19th century, and we have price data that goes back further.
Okay.
So it depends exactly what we're talking about.
The reason I ask is if you were to look, so it sounds like it could be anywhere from from 80 to 120 years or so that we have data on some level. If you were to look at immigration cohorts and follow their experience economically in the United States, is there a point that's, for lack of a better term, a break even point where, like, if you took like cohorts, say 10-year cohorts or 5-year, I don't know what makes sense at that level of analysis. Um, would you say there's a particular time frame that we're looking at where there's absolutely zero doubt about the economic benefit or detriment of immigration? Because I could actually see someone saying, like, look, maybe Alex is right. Over the course of 40 years, immigration more than pays for itself. But hey, I'm living in the here and now. I'm not going to be here 40 years from now. I'm looking at whether I'm going to eat, given the economic situation. I'm looking at whether I'm going to eat next month. And I feel they're cutting into my being able to put foot on the table now, as opposed to 10 years, 20, 30 years
So, I mean, you're talking about the fiscal situation, right? Like taxes and budgets, right?
from
I mean, if that's what you're actually worried about, and I don't, it depends again on the age of the person and how educated they are. But if that's what they're worried about, then those people should support the immigration of single men in their 20s, which is, by the way, the group of people that they hate the most
now.
because they call them military age males.
Mm,
So what that means is that nativists should support the immigration, or people who are worried about the fiscal contribution of immigrants. They should support the overwhelming immigration of military age males to the United States because they will work a lot. They won't be bogged down by families or have children on their own, and therefore there would be an enormous fiscal contribution. But they don't, which tells me that nobody actually really cares about it from that angle. Like you and I hypothetically,
mm.
the hypothetical person might, but I don't think that person actually really. There's not more than a handful of those people in the real world.
Okay. Being an economist, we've covered, not economist, but being loving to talk about economics. We had a good conversation. But let me turn to what you said. Two other issues that when you hear objections to immigration, uh, crime, and of course those grab all the headlines, Alex, right? Lake and Riley, and that's often used for horrible political solutions, like what we're seeing now out of the Trump administration. Um, Talk to me about immigration and crime. What is it in general, and has it been getting better or worse, say, in the last 10 years?
Yeah. So what we know is, first off, it's a little difficult to get reliable data on immigration and crime in the United States. And uh, on some ways, it's really good. On some ways, it's bad. So, for instance, if we take a look at incarceration rates as recorded by prisons and jails across the U.S. and then reported in U.S. Census and American Community Survey data, we see that immigrants in total are about less than half as likely to be in prison as native-born Americans, and that includes immigration offenses, by the way. When you can break it down a little further into legal immigrants versus illegal immigrants, you find that illegal immigrants are about half as likely to be incarcerated, and legal immigrants are about half as likely again. So you have much lower incarceration rates for immigrants in the United States. Now, those are incarceration rates where we have to estimate who the illegal immigrants are. So it's not like you answer on a survey, yes, I'm an illegal immigrant to the US government, right? Like, so we have to make some estimates. So that's a good critique. But there is one state that does record criminal convictions and arrests by immigration status, and that is the great state of Texas, which has the second highest illegal immigrant population. And what we do is we narrow it down, we take a look at homicide, different types of crimes that are the most likely to be recorded and investigated to make sure that the people who are convicted are illegal immigrants. And what we find is that illegal immigrants are less likely to be convicted of homicide than native born Americans, and legal immigrants the least likely of all of these groups. And so they're less likely to be criminals. And we've taken a look at every possible counter objection to this. Like maybe they commit their crime and they go back across the border. But we take a look at places in Texas that have a lot of illegal immigrants and places that don't have a lot. We compare what's called the clearance rates, which is the rate at which local police solve these homicides. No differences. We would expect there to be a big difference if illegal immigrants commit a ton of murders and leave. We don't see that. And this holds for most other crimes in Texas that we have evidence for, right? So immigrants are less likely to be criminals in the United States, less likely to be convicted, less likely to be arrested. But if they are arrested, more likely to be convicted. So that's an interesting part right there. So if they're arrested, they're more likely to have done it than native born Americans are. And I think part of the reason why this is we get good immigrants from abroad. People come here, they think about the future, they want to work hard, etc. And those types of people just don't commit a lot of crimes. But also native born Americans commit a lot of crimes. We're very crime prone. And so one of the responses that people will say is they'll be like, well, the black incarceration rate is really high. If you take out blacks, then maybe immigrants have a higher incarceration rate. Well, we did that with the data. Immigrants and illegal immigrants still have a much lower incarceration rate than all Americans subtracted black Americans. So like it doesn't hold. And what's interesting is you hear the opposite in Europe. And there is a lot of good evidence in Europe, in some countries at least, that immigrants do have a higher crime rate than natives. But what's interesting is if you take that higher crime rate immigrant population in Europe and bring it over to the US, they actually have a lower crime rate than Americans. So part of it is just like we love to commit crime in the US. And that's why immigrants look so awesome, is that Americans are so bad on this metric.
So then my next question probably answers itself. What about the assimilation of immigrants? Which is funny because according to what you said, a sign of assimilating to be a good American is to become more of a criminal.
So there is evidence of that. So like those who are born here from immigrant parents who are Hispanic, who are Asian, they do have crime rates that look closer to that of native born Americans. Sometimes a little bit higher, sometimes a lot lower. It depends on the ethnic group, country of origin, education, prospects. But one of the tricky things with studying this is called ethnic attrition. And what this is like subsequent generations don't identify with the ethnic group that their immigrant ancestors had.
Sure, that's only natural. Yeah,
Yeah, it's only natural. It happens through intermarriage,
right.
with other ethnic groups and whatever. So you get to the point where after like multiple generations of Hispanics in the United States, the number of people who like shrink down, who then self-identify as Hispanic after like 3 or 4 generations, like tiny, it's minuscule. And the people who identify as Hispanic after those 3 or 4 generations, they are very different than the average person who is descended from Hispanic immigrants. In the same way that if you meet somebody today who's like, "Oh, I'm an Italian," like that person's going to be different than other people who are the descendants of Italian immigrants, but who didn't assimilate, right? Like in the same way that like Tony Soprano was different from lots of the other Italian Americans in the show who just like didn't really care about
There was that famous Sopranos episode where they went back to Italy and they couldn't believe how different they were, the Italians in Jersey versus the Italians in Italy. Yeah, interesting little thing there. All right, Alex, I want to start wrapping up a little bit, not because it's not an interesting conversation, but I want to be respectful of your time. Um, Final question. While I would say Americans, especially during the Biden years, seeing just visually seeing what was happening at the southern border, certainly there were a lot of libertarians who all of a sudden became big Trump fans, largely because of that. And I think on bogus libertarian grounds, in my opinion. Um, you know, uh, Dave Smith, I think I saw your debate with Dave Smith at the Soho Center on this. Um, libertarians, individualists, until it comes to collectivist property in the US, apparently. But that aside, um, while a lot of Americans, you may have gotten support in saying we need to get control of the southern border. Fair enough. I don't think too many of them really understood what it meant to pursue this policy of expulsion, of rounding up illegal aliens, illegal immigrants, and sending and deporting them. Certainly, that was one of the things I was warning about. Like, you can't get rid of 10, 13, 15 million people without becoming a police state, without becoming a dictatorship. Um, in the lead up to the current administration's policies, um, did you find that there was this split in polling, perhaps, or whereas people would say, like, okay, if you made it here, great, but we want the border shut down now. If you made it across, you got lucky. If you didn't, sorry, bad on you. Do you think there was that intellectual divide, or do you think nobody ever considered it?
I think very few people consider it. Dave Smith didn't consider it in the debate because I made the point that if you want to deport millions of people, that is more likely to bring tyranny to the United States than any other policy. And he just kind of laughed and whatever. Anyway, it wasn't long after when I started, killing people with impunity in American streets, and there's no legal repercussions, right? So, he the guy's more of a Republican than anything, frankly, and I think he should retire from political forecasting or predictions because he was wrong about everything about Trump. He voted for Trump. You said in a big way, he supported him. I don't know if you voted for him, but you supported him because he was like the peace candidate, and that's like a joke, right? Like, so I think the guy has really bad judgment. He certainly doesn't smell like a libertarian or sound like one when he talks about stuff. So he needs to, I think, take the L, take the lesson, and retire, in my opinion, from this. And people should, if you were to have that debate today, because I lost the debate in voting, I think if we had the debate today, I'd win because people would see it for what it is today. But in terms of the split in voting, I don't think we would have seen much of a difference to that because people didn't really understand what mass deportations mean. They don't really think about what those things mean, and I think it's something that sounded nice to a lot of people. And they didn't understand that it would require masked federal agents on the streets every once in a while, killing and shooting people for violating what are, in effect, labor market regulations.
Final question on the issue. Um, you don't see as much major coverage about these ICE incidents anymore. Part of it is um, Homan really being more the face of it, I think, and disappearing from the spotlight. Do you feel that we're on our way to things getting better, or do you feel we still have a lot to go through before we break through to a more, for lack of a better term, more libertarian sort of outlook on when it comes to deportation?
No, we're things are going to get worse throughout the entirety of the Trump administration. They're not going to calm down. They're not going to back down. And one thing you know about this is that the Trump administration lies about everything when it comes to immigration, about everything. So after those two people were killed by ICE agents and Border Patrol agents in Minneapolis, they said, hey, we're pulling back from Minneapolis. They didn't take any agents out. They didn't stop their operations. They just lied about it. And they didn't wind down until months later when they were done with their operations there. And they do that all over the place, all over the country, all the time. They are liars. You cannot trust what they say about what they're going to do with anything. It's one of the few areas where they are ideologically committed to something. The Trump administration is ideologically committed to mass deportations. They say things differently here or there. Don't pay attention to what they say. Just look at what they do. The only thing that would be an indication in my mind that they were changing course is if Stephen Miller left the administration. That is it. So until that happens, don't listen to anything they say about how they're going to pull back or do this pro immigration thing or that thing. It's not true. Don't fall for it. Everybody falls for it. Don't be a sucker.
Mhm. So the fact that Miller's disappeared from public view, essentially, uh, you're you're not convinced that that signals any sort of change. It's more just a tactical regrouping of sorts.
They're changing their marketing.
Okay, fair enough.
That's all it is.
Alex, it's been a great conversation, but before we end, I always end on something called the final five. These are five questions. Hopefully, no right or wrong answers, but just to get to know you a little bit better for the viewers. Okay, number one, what is the most statistically indefensible belief you continue to hold anyway?
Statistically indefensible? Oh, I probably say statistically indefensible. Geez. I oh boy. Let's see. I think that illegal immigrants, I think there's probably more than 15 or 16 million illegal immigrants in the United States.
Hmm.
I think there's probably more than the standard numbers that we see reported.
Then that's the gut feeling. Okay, fair enough. Let's assume I can wave a magic wand and you can enact your ideal immigration reform tomorrow. But the catch is you have to personally run the agency responsible for implementing it. Would you take that deal?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
The
In a heart.
the bureaucracy does not scare you.
No.
Okay,
I live in DC, right? So I see bureaucracy every day. I study it. The thing is, under my ideal immigration system, there'd be a lot less bureaucracy, and they would focus on things that actually matter, like trying to prevent the immigration of violent and property criminals and national security threats, and those are serious contagious diseases, right? And so that would be a mission. I'd be fine with that mission.
fantastic. Okay, would you rather take a cross country road trip with an open borders advocate who agrees with about everything that you agree with, or a restrictionist who makes you laugh for the whole trip?
I mean, the latter.
Okay. You'll put
Yeah.
up with the nonsense as long as they can make you giggle on that road trip.
Yeah, I mean, I already know all the arguments. I've heard them all on both sides. So at this stage in my career, I would much rather be entertained because there's not a whole lot that I would learn from either of them. But I could be entertained, so that's worth it.
Fair enough. Uh, what's sort of like a left-handed compliment from a critic that you've gotten that actually stung a little?
This one guy, um, said, "You have great physiognomy for a libertarian who supports immigration." But as soon as he heard my voice, he knew that it was basically all surface level, and that I have the same sort of negative physiognomy as like every pro-immigration person. And I was like, fair enough, my voice is not the best.
Okay.
No, it's a really that's like a super online comment. So
Okay. Um, Final one. Everybody who talks for a living, you've certainly given testimony in front of Congress. People have constantly seen you. Uh, you and David Bleer say really put forth the case for pro-immigration. You get into a lot of heated arguments. Uh, in during these arguments, or is there ever a line you will not cross intellectually when arguing with someone or debating with someone?
What do you mean, like intellectually?
Well, in other words, is there something that's taboo? Like, for example, would you, in arguing, reference your opponent? And I'm being superficial here, but just to make the point, hey, you sound like an idiot, or here's something from your past that I will use against you in this argument, or something to that effect.
I really try not to do that. I don't do that in my professional capacity. Maybe I slip in my personal life sometimes, in that. But I always try to remember that I'm not trying to convince them. I'm trying to convince the people who are watching the debate. And the only way to do that, I think, is to be, entertaining, to be funny, to make good points, to be principled, and to not be a an intolerable jerk.
Mm,
Oh. So those are all important issues there.
fantastic. Alex, thank you so much for joining me on the big question today. Please tell people, where can they follow you? Any socials or websites you'd like to promote? A Substack?
So you can follow me on Twitter at Alex Nowrasteh. And Substack, I have a Substack with David Beer called Laissez Faire, Laissez Passer. But you can search our names and find us in there. And then on the Cato website, cato.org. That is cato.org.
Great libertarian think tank, and one that we've all known about for a while. All right, Alex, thank you so much for joining me. And for everyone else, please like and subscribe. And join me next time when I'll have another interesting guest like Alex. Until then, peace, everyone.